Okay, so I'm gonna start with creating a new design language for this helmet. Way I'm gonna demonstrate this is by thinking out loud and just really give an introduction on how I'm going to process this. And you might find me making some mistakes and going back and forth, but I think that's really the best way to really learn, because you really figure out what's in my head, and hopefully there's a value for that. So I'm gonna start with a new layer, and I'm gonna select the original design, reduce the opacity to say maybe 40%. And because it's white line on black background, I am going to invert it. So now it looks like that. So just like the process of getting inspiration images or reference images from real reference or object, you can either collect references or you can make up your own motifs. Motifs would be the key features that your design identifies by. For instance, as I mentioned in the previous video, the curvature here, the curvature here, or here, same as these pieces here. So these are the key features that really gives this design what flavor it has or what it appeals it has. As you progress with experience, you start to make that process right away, but I'm going to give a small introduction on what's going to be my plan. So I need to create some motifs or lines or design elements that I'm going to follow in order for me to reach a consistent design. So for instance, I'm going to start with a curvy language. So ultimately that's going to make this to be like that. If I were to undo, if I were to make this really circular, that wouldn't be appealing. It wouldn't be unique. Instead, I would give it just some blending, and that would be that would take it to a different level. So with that conclusion, I would conclude that this is one of the key elements that I want to go with. And maybe I would follow the same here. So here's the first thing to keep in mind. If you want to make it as close as possible to the original design, while really revamping the design language, you want to follow the same pattern. So for instance, if I make this key feature here, or let me make a selection. Okay. If I were to make this key feature here, and then let me lock this, select the layer, and lock. Okay. So now I can pick this. I can rotate it and really consider making it to replace this piece here. So I would be consistent, or yeah, I would be consistent exactly with the pattern that was in the original design, meaning that in the previous design, if you remember, I have this area here, I have this area here, and this area here to have the same curvature, right? So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to copy to make this new design here to be applied here. This way, it's going to feel really as close as possible to the original design. And in the same way here. Of course, you don't have to really copy and paste, but you can just really get as close as you think you should. And I can even summarize this whole thing here, either this way or maybe this way. And yeah, possibly here. If you feel at some point it would be too much, then you might end up keeping some of the surfaces as they were, but I also would add some curving there. If this feels to be a tricky area, I would just pronounce it a little bit more with more edges, and that would allow me to maintain that curve there. And also, as you try to implement those, you will find that certain areas would introduce new ideas to follow. Now, in the previous design, notice you have a line here, or I have a line here, and then straight, and then it starts to curve gently. Instead, I would just go this way. And then if you even like follow it like this, that would make it extra curvy, and it would give it that extra feel to it. I may also consider, what if I actually make it this way? Or maybe if I were to make it to kind of taper out instead. I could also consider making something like this. And don't be afraid of making silly ideas. You can only know if your idea is silly after you create it. So if you're too afraid of making mistakes or making silly stuff, you're basically hindering your creativity. Yeah, so conclusion, although this is not going to be necessarily repeated, it can, so it's good to kind of have it on the side here. You can also make it on the side to be more deliberate with the curvature, so you're not limited with the design here. So when you have something like this, you would say, okay, I'm going to really change a lot here just to make that kind of curvature. If that makes sense. Meaning you would go the extra mile just to satisfy this curve. But in this case, what I'm going to do is to satisfy the need for that limitation that I have here. So in the same way, I'm going to copy the same pattern here. And really, like, it's very important when you're making like smooth lines. Notice how this is created with my shoulder, but if I make it with my hand, it would have different feel. And in many cases, if you can, like if you're working on a large tablet, if you can make this with the shoulder, I'm gonna hit F, by the way, and F again, and tab. Now it's like full screen. And because I'm using the SenseLab pen display, it's like a Cintiq, I can have a lot more room to go with a full swing with my shoulder. And really, it's really useful to keep in mind that the professionals, the way they go around making these curves, exactly as I'm telling you. I know that from Mikal Kus. Let me write his name. Mikal Kus. Mikal, maybe? I think it's CH. He's a top-tier professional concept artist. I took a class with him, and I know it from him that I thought that it was just me that I do this, where like I make a curve and then undo until I really find the sweet spot. He said that's exactly how he does it. If he said that's how he does it, then that's the way to go, in my opinion. He's really like terrific, amazing, just brilliant. So I'm just gonna follow his advice on that. If I like this curvature here, then I might end up altering this to kind of satisfy that curvature there and make it, either I can copy it if I want to, or I can just try to mimic it. And at this point, I don't really care so much about making the perfection on this layer, because typically what I do is once I'm done, I would make a new layer and retrace everything, because that always introduces the potential for a better line art or design language or iterations or you know, line art improvement. So at least just to get the right idea is a really good method. Let's see. With the Sense Lab, I can easily, with the controller, rotate, which makes it super convenient. So now I can also zoom in, and I can also take more curved approach. Notice how it's a really nice swing. That's again because it's coming from the shoulder. And then I would try to mimic some of the design explorations that I had on the side. Sometimes it's like, yeah, just keep it the way it is, maybe better. So here I have the potential for making a kind of resemblance between the connection here and the connection here. So it's up to me to, as a designer, to choose. Maybe I would really go all the way and really make it a bit more deliberate, as like two kind of spiraling lines. And then in that case, I wouldn't push this in. I would rather just kind of make it more round in that case. And just to remind myself of the decision I am making, I would just erase that. But I'll do that later since I have layers and I don't have to worry about it. I can just simply scratch it. When I create a new layer, I would really fill that in. And of course, this is a perfect area for me to really just go around. Doesn't seem to be the right position for me, so I'm just gonna zoom in closer. I'll rotate and I'll undo. Coming from the shoulder. And now at this point here, this depends on how you're going to pursue your project. If you're doing this in 3D, this is as good as you need to go, because 3D is going to make it really perfect. So you don't have to make it like overly perfected at this point here, unless you really want to. Even if you're a perfectionist, this is one of the good exercises where there's a certain time where perfection could hurt you. Because if you don't have the time budget for perfecting everything, then you're just basically wasting your time. This is predictable and granted. I can even explore kind of a deeper cut, but I think that might be too much because we want to maintain as much surface around the head, which would be somewhere here. Scared. Oh no, an alien. Okay. What else? Here is another area where I could emphasize the same feel here on this area. And maybe I can give more of a hunch here. And then out of that, I would undo, undo, undo. Okay. Going to rotate. And since the human neck isn't that thick, I have some leverage here to cut deeper. And then counter that with shoulder blade kind of curvature there. And of course, Granted, I'm gonna go with this approach here. And zoom. And this could be also reminiscent of what I have in here and here. So you could find a pattern or you can find a proportion, meaning that this could be, the distance could be 1 inch if you must, and then 1.1, 1.2, 1.4, 1.6, just to give some sort of, to reduce the monotonous feel and make it less boring as it repeats itself. I could also explore, and this is what I mentioned by as you're drawing, you start to explore new ideas. Instead of just making a straight line, and instead of making something that is somewhat typical, which is basically double lines, instead of that, I could explore with the idea of having that line to kind of appear in the middle and disappear towards the end. Again, don't be afraid of exploring some ideas you almost believe firmly that they're stupid, because you need to see how stupid they are first until you really agree that they are stupid and should be avoided. And sometimes it's good to break away from the curves and kind of make them less predictable in that sense. Meaning that in this area here, I didn't go full swing with the curvature. Here I would follow a certain motif. This is important since it's going to be repeated by design. I would just translate it into a curvy motif. Kind of an easy transition there. Then even here towards the end. Just really, it's like think of the difference between Wally and Eva. Now I'm gonna go more into the more relaxed mode where I really draw really roughly. Now that I've established what my thought process is. And this would be an easier way to work, because my experiments would be more intuitive and natural than thinking about voicing my thoughts. Sometimes it's good to start with the lines. Other times it's also useful to think about only the negative space. So in this case here, I'm going to be thinking about a round shape that has oval corners. So it's not a circle, it's not an oval, which gives it the ability to be adapting to the shape of the helmet. And that also makes it really easy to transfer into here. So as I mentioned before, and this is pretty much like the golden ratio, large, medium, and small, right? So the same thing I mentioned in here. That's a horrible arrow. In here, you have a smaller gap, and then you scale it. You scale that gap up and up, just to break the monotonous feel, right? So in this case here, okay, I think it's crashing. Yeah, so Photoshop crashed. And now it's, after I killed it, it's now back online. Okay, so back here I can now go small, medium, and then large. So in that case it would be, I'll start with a circle and then I would tweak it. And of course, not to mention, like, it's not even an idea to mention. It's granted that you can make the shape. Let me demonstrate that. You can make the shape, okay, and gonna fill it with color. Control D, Control T, and then right mouse button. This is more like giving yourself more leverage over the idea of using Photoshop tools, or if you're using Procreate, you can just do some warping if that makes it easier for you. But I like to keep things just really freehand, because that introduces us to a lot more mistakes and errors to learn from, and also it will introduce a lot more ideation seeds that I can follow and pursue. So here this one is more like oval, but I can reshape it a little bit. And this one is a little bit more defined, and I like the language of this piece here better because it has some angles. So I'm going to clean the edges a little bit here, polish the edges just a tad, and yeah, and I'll also erase from here. And this could be really my design language for these spots. And then in that case, I would make the belts to kind of go this way. And as you can see, I can even go to the extent of ditching the straps and have something that is a lot more spherical. Just stick to that. Same here. I'm gonna copy the same. The source is more kind of circular. Sorry, by the source I mean this angle here. So this one, and this one are more round, but the rest are more linear. And I can also go back to this one. And ultimately I can find a design that works for me, where it would make the base and then I would free the room for it here. And it's very, very important to keep in mind that you should always keep in mind that ultimately whatever you do here, you're going to make a new layer and really polish all of these things, because otherwise you're going to be obsessed with erasing and cleaning. And as you can see, I don't care, right? That carelessness is a good host for creativity. That's why that's why the creative process requires sometimes what John Cleese calls incubation. I can tell you more about that later. I'll just have my hand to really explore stuff that I don't have to think about. And then I'll think about it after my hand creates it. This could be another motif that I can go with, where it's segmented, it has this curvature, and it has then this stronger curvature. It's like an egg shape or hairpin, as they call it in rally race. Hairpin left, hairpin right. Okay, let's see. It looks like a mess. Usually it's a good sign. Now this area here is important, so I cannot really compromise it. And as of now, it's still protected. But yeah, you can see now I will combine these layers, merge down, merge down. So it just still feels the same helmet, but just a different language. So that is my process. This is how I reiterate things. And it's the most important thing about this process is that it's fun, it's enjoyable, and you just need to do one or two, and then eventually it gets in your system, and then it becomes a habit, and it becomes a kind of an artistic yoga, if you must, where you just do it mindlessly and while listening to some music, and next thing you know, you're filling up more and more. You're filling up your imagination and visual library more and more of that richness of details. And of course, if you combine that while looking up references, notice that this is all from my head. That's why it's not looking really that impressive. It's just all improvised. If you look at references, it would be a lot better. I can here now just add just an additional touch here, a unique addition that is not really to change the curvature. The curvature is still going to be the same as that, like the main curvature is still going to be this one here. But this, however, is going to be more like a flashlight. So when I go and polish this, let me just briefly give you an idea of what I plan on doing, possibly if I could make the time. But if I want to really elaborate on this, I can just really reduce this and then go to the new layer, and this could be more like this. And then here's the area for the flashlight, and then some patterns. Those patterns you see on the flashlight sometimes. Oh, let me redo. Let me zoom in so I can do it somewhat properly. You could possibly extend it just to make it more believable. And I'll make a new layer so I can do this and erase easily. Then merge down. So this could be a flashlight. I'm not really gonna render it, but just something here that I'm not even gonna use gradient. I'm just gonna go really old-fashioned maybe. Then I'm gonna go filter, blur, and box blur. Maybe exaggerate it a little bit, just for fun. And just for more fun, I will duplicate it, and then I'm going to start to change the blending modes. So yeah, I'm gonna reduce the opacity. Maybe I'll end up polishing with a new layer, polishing the whole helmet and do some 2D rendering of it. But really, the last thing I would do is I would observe and see like what areas that look really emptier than they should be. The first one that stands out to me is this one here. Yeah, so I gotta do something here. And especially when these are curved like that, it's gonna feel emptier. So I'm going to now follow this path, but I'm not gonna merge it with the spiral there. So I'm gonna merge it this way here. And maybe I'll borrow one of those shapes there, here. This is a perfect area for greebles. The details that you would throw for aesthetic sense of scale and possibly some interesting information. So for instance, like a robotic or electronic chipset, or even reiterating the pattern here. You could do something that kind of correlates to it in a curvy way. Yeah, hopefully that helps. So that was my process. Now the next stage would be to make a cleaner version, which is really like a lot of fun. And after that would be the rendering, the 2D rendering. If you're interested in seeing a version with a cleaner iteration, the finalized version, let me know. If there's enough interest, I'm happy to create that video. And also if there's enough interest in 2D rendering version, I'm also happy to create a 2D rendering. And I hope this video was helpful.